morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Jonathan Adashek, the Chief Communications Officer at IBM. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about how good content impacts public relations. I'm going to focus on three premises today. First, great content starts with a strategy that is grounded in deep understanding of the business. Second, an effective content strategy fires on all fronts: the message, the medium, the platform, and the ecosystem. And finally, content that shows who we are, not just what we do, positively impacts our reputation and our communications efforts. I'll share my point of view and some examples of what makes good content and the impact it has. So let's get started. First, great content starts with a content strategy that is grounded in a deep understanding of the business. IBM's strategy is to focus on the hybrid cloud market, which is a $1 trillion opportunity, along with AI. I know many people are not clear on what hybrid cloud is or how it impacts you on a daily basis. But if I told you that you couldn't access a digital wallet without a hybrid cloud access, or you couldn't access Netflix, I bet you a lot of people's interest would be piqued. So as we align our company's efforts for our strategy, we need to look for interesting ways to deliver the message. We don't create content to tell stories just for the sake of it. We have to create content to consistently communicate our efforts and our narrative over time. So back to hybrid cloud. This is a challenging message to deliver. We need to make the content interesting and relatable and show how IBM leads in this competitive space. Let me tell you how we're taking this on. We started with developing a fact-based argument on why hybrid cloud matters to business, societies, and individuals. And we really think about how we tell the story at every level, reach people in a way that they understand. COVID-19 provided us with a unique opportunity to make hybrid cloud relevant for our times. With a vast majority of the workforce resorting to everything remote, there is an enormous increase in the need for digitization. Everybody gets this. But what they don't know is that the speed and scale needed to make this happen can only be delivered by hybrid cloud. So how do we make these facts real for people? We used our involvement with the US Open tennis tournament to bring all these messages. IBM has sponsored the US Open for the past 3 years. But this year, we played an even bigger role when the entire event went digital. We had a story to tell about how we delivered an exciting and engaging event for millions of fans around the world using IBM's artificial intelligence and hybrid cloud. Naturally, we played up the cool features like the ability for fans to hold virtual debates and the use of AI to create the sound of the crowd. So while we talked about the US Open in media interviews, we were able to pivot the conversation to where we wanted it to go and highlight how businesses are using the same technologies, including IBM's hybrid cloud, to transform into digital enterprises.
So let's think about the problem that we solve. We're looking at all the data to help the US Open and a fan understand the language and the communication, the documents, everything that's ever existed for the US Open. Every business has the same problem. They're saying, how can I make sense of my data and put it in the hands of the right employees? So we're working with companies like PayPal, Honda, Korea Airlines. They're all using similar technology to understand their data and then better serve their customers using AI. So it's the same exact technology that we're using for the US Open is also what we use for businesses. Think of it as on a hybrid cloud, connecting different data sources, and then understanding language. And what's really unique about IBM Watson is the ability to understand the human language.
Another tactic we use is to tap into our 350,000 employees, 90,000 of which are in India, and use them as ambassadors of the message. In the case of hybrid cloud, we've been running an interactive internal campaign so our employees would better understand and be able to talk about hybrid cloud with their clients and their social networks. The reason it's so important to always stay grounded in the business could not have been more apparent than the recent announcement IBM made about spinning off our managed infrastructure services business. It's a $19 billion piece of our company. As I previously mentioned, We're doubling down on hybrid cloud and AI, and this managed infrastructure services business does not align with that focus. As you can imagine, this was a big announcement. And what we saw was 97% of the coverage was neutral to favorable, and almost all of it was on message. That wouldn't have happened if we weren't already sharing our story. So just to summarize what we believe has worked well in telling our hybrid cloud story. We've worked with the business to ground the narrative in facts and support IBM's goal of owning the hybrid cloud space. We've made the hybrid cloud story relatable. We've used case studies about digitization, client examples, and have told the stories in many different forms. We've also tapped into a large, diverse ecosystem of employees, developers, partners, clients, and social influencers to help us tell the story. However, I would like to see us make our clients stand out more in our stories, and this is something we're working on to improve. If I then go to the next topic, an effective content strategy, it fires on all fronts, the message medium, platform, and ecosystem. They all work together to drive the story, influencing the media and other stakeholders. It's not just what we write, it's where we publish it, what format we use, and who tells our story. To grab the attention of the media, content needs to inspire, provide something new and unique. I regularly ask myself, is what we are writing about any different than what's out there today? We need to let people be the heroes of our stories whenever we can, and that will get more attention and be more relatable. Through good content, we show and we don't tell how our companies are differentiated. That means finding the client and end users to demonstrate our value. We also need to find purpose, a purpose that's bigger than the bottom line. For IBM, we've been able to create content around our commitment to tech for good, to racial equality, and to inclusion. And they're not just through blogs or press releases. These are also policies and programs. And the pickup we get from this content is very solid. We need to remain true to our company's narrative, and that is instrumental. And we can't get bored with our own story. Keep building on key messages, and we need to keep telling it in different ways, but staying true and staying grounded in that story. The medium also makes a big difference. We need to know what's good and bad about each format. Print, for example, is good for complex stories with lots of data. It lets you make long-form arguments and sticks around to be consumed over time. Video, it can be used to tell a visual story. It's easy, it's comfortable, and it draws people in. Infographics, they communicate data simply and quickly. Photography can also set a tone or a mood, but we don't stop there. We have to think beyond that. Are there unusual formats to better deliver content? For example, when we told the story about IBM's X-Force Red team, a group of ethical hackers who break into client systems to find security gaps, we created a superhero comic book to capture the superhero nature of that team. We all spend a lot of time thinking about social platforms for sharing as well. Which one is the best for our messages? Is it Facebook? Is it LinkedIn, Twitter, or any other number of platforms? But to meet our audience where they live, we need to go deeper. For IBM as a tech company, we look to publish on forums and blogs and websites for developers. We tap into academic industry blogs that align to our efforts. We also look for advocates to help tell our story. We have to define our ecosystem. Who are the social media influencers who care about our products? They might be different each time, but we can find those people and they can help us find end users who better tell our story. Our employees can also be our most powerful advocates. I believe we are failing from the start if we do not focus on our employees from the beginning and arm them with the right messages and the right assets. But keep in mind, this ecosystem I'm talking about, it will only help us tell our story if they find it unique, inspiring, or just plain cool. After all, it's their reputation at stake. I want to take a minute to talk about how great owned content can lead to very impactful earned content. Many of us may not consider owned content as valuable as media coverage, but at IBM, we found that with the right owned content, it has led to higher value coverage in outlets that may never have considered IBM. What we see work well is when we use own content for situations that are not business as usual, when we are doing or saying something that is not expected, when we're looking to pique someone's curiosity. I'll share with you an own piece of content from our IBM research team that was the first IBM YouTube video to break 1 million views. The movie tells a story of a boy and a wayward Adam who meet and become friends. The video became part of a wide-ranging PR campaign with coverage in some unlikely outlets, such as the Guinness Book of World Records, TED, and the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City. That was a great video. I love that story. But finally, we believe that content has the power to show who we are, not just what we do, and it positively impacts our reputation and in turn, public relations. How do we do that? We strive to be hyper aware of what's going on in the external environment, whether it's our competition, a pandemic, or gender equality. As communicators, it's our job to help our companies respond in a way that aligns to our values. For example, IBM started the Call for Code program to entice developers to use technology for solving societal issues. This year, we revamped our program to focus on COVID-19, and we were just recognized by PR Week with a Purpose Award. These actions generate good PR, resonate with broad audiences, and carry our narratives forward. We work with the business to find the right partners, such as schools, governments, and NGOs, to endorse, support, and collaborate on our efforts. And they help us tell a story in a meaningful way in the context of societal efforts. And we commission research and studies to get the facts, stats, and trends that will help us show how our products can solve some of these important issues. We should all have a strong point of view where it makes sense. We need to choose credible spokespeople who are passionate about the issue and work with them to say something new and insightful that makes people pause and take notice. For example, there's a lot of controversy around artificial intelligence and whether it causes more harm than good. At IBM, we've taken a vocal stand on using tech for good. In fact, one of our senior leaders recently participated in the Rome Call for AI Ethics with the Vatican earlier this year to share IBM's view that the development of AI must be in service to humankind and the planet. It was powerful and it was noticed. I want to end my presentation today with a case study on a unique project called the Mayflower autonomous ship. It exemplifies all the things I've talked about. A few years ago, IBM had a unique opportunity to get involved in building a fully autonomous ship named the Mayflower. It was capable of self-navigating across the Atlantic. It would have no human captain or onboard crew. It would use artificial intelligence and edge computing to sense, think, and make decisions at sea. The goal was to create a more flexible and cost-effective way for scientists to gather data about the ocean and to better understand pollution, marine mammal conservation, and global warming. The project started as a grassroots effort led by a marine nonprofit 4 years ago and has since captured the attention of scientists, oceanographers, governments, NGOs, individuals, and even astronauts all around the world. This past September, the Mayflower was launched off Plymouth in the UK. It'll spend the next few months in sea trials before crossing the Atlantic next spring. The IBMers who first started working on this knew they were onto something special. IBM helped put a man on the moon, so surely we could help mankind create a robot ship that could cross the Atlantic autonomously. With its innovative use of AI and hybrid cloud technologies and the grand challenge ahead, this was a project that felt like IBM. While there was an element of risk, IBM communications team knew this was a story with universal appeal and enough drama to captivate audiences and earn mindshare for months, if not years. Through Mayflower, we could drive coverage about IBM's innovative technologies, expertise, purpose, and strengthen our position against major competitors who are also highly visible in the societal and exploratory science space. But we also knew there were challenges, including the name itself. You probably know the original Mayflower was the ship that took a group of pilgrims and other settlers from England 400 years ago. We had to think about what the Mayflower represented for Native Americans. How could we showcase IBM's technology without overwhelming the original premise of the ship itself? We also needed to consider if the ship would ever even be built and if it would float. By all accounts, this has been a great success for us. We've been publicizing a number of milestones along the way, and so far the story has reached hundreds of millions of people, with placements worldwide, from the Times of India to the BBC, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and my favorite, Saturday Night Live. The success has hinged on 5 factors. First, rather than focus on IBM, our heroes are the people on the ground, the engineers, the shipbuilders, the scientists, and the technologists who are doing the actual work. These people share a personal passion for the ocean and the project. We even gave voice to a direct descendant of the original 1620 Mayflower crossing, who is now one of the IBMers working on the project. Second, we decided we were in it for the long haul, from conception to the moment the ship crosses the Atlantic next spring. We let the story roll out naturally and organically. We didn't get ahead of ourselves. We've stuck with it, and we're creating milestones, new assets, and opportunities along the way. Third, we partnered with independent organizations to tell different parts of the story. The team from the nonprofit ProMare, who is building the ship, are great ambassadors for IBM. And we even partnered with a historical organization to greatly expand our ecosystem beyond our traditional influencers. Fourth, we never lost sight of the real purpose of the project, to explore the oceans, rather than this just being a stunt to showcase artificial intelligence. We can tell the technology and industry stories in parallel, but the ocean needed to take center stage if we're going to truly touch people's heart. And lastly, we made this a visual interactive story with investments in computer-generated graphics and demos, drone footage, photography, and GoPro cameras as the ship started taking shape. Our team even built a dedicated website with live data from the ship and an IBM AI chatbot to answer questions. All of this meant that in the end, the media has been coming to us. We never had to really go out and hard sell this story. We had the biggest publications in the world coming to us. As we say on our team, it's the story that keeps on giving. And you know what? The best thing about this, it hasn't even sailed across the Atlantic yet. Watch the space in 2021 of spring. It's going to be really cool to see.
The sea is an awesomely powerful thing. There are vast areas of the ocean that we know literally nothing about. We know more about the surface of the moon than certain parts of our own planet. It's that ignorance that should scare us, because the ocean controls the entire climate on our planet. This project is not about the last 400 years. It's about the next 400. It's about the future. The Mayflower autonomous ship is inspired by the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower crossing from Plymouth to Plymouth.
Well, now we're talking a whole nother story where there's no humans on board. So we've got a ship that's going to make decisions on its own.
It doesn't have anybody sort of in a control room pressing buttons or anything like that.
I did 33.5 years in the Navy. I'd never seen anything like that in my life.
There's no guarantee of success for any number of reasons. It's the beginning of something new.
Have we thought of every possible situation that it could encounter?
Autonomous vessels like the Mayflower will really allow us to collect as much data as possible. What are we going to discover? What does the future hold for this type of research?
The single biggest challenge is the ocean itself. So no ship has ever been built that can survive whatever the ocean could throw at it.
Leveraging technology, autonomy, machine learning, and AI is going to open up the door to a new era of ocean science.
So with that, I'm going to wrap up. The Mayflower Project is a story we dream about in communications. But I believe with the right strategy, any content can be made appealing and capture the attention of employees, media, and other stakeholders. While all the bells and whistles make our efforts more exciting, we can't lose sight of the basics. We have to make our content relatable. We have to use the best medium to tell our story, and we have to engage our employees, and we have to tap into a broad ecosystem. In the end, great content, which results in great coverage, needs to have an impact on our business and our reputation. So stay grounded in your company's mission and strategy. As I do with my own team, I'd like to leave you with one thing to remember. If your story wasn't out there, would anyone miss it? Think about that as you go out and create new content and tell your stories. With that, I'd like to thank you all for having me. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to joining you for some questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a wonderful keynote, and I'm sure our audience has learned a lot from what you've said. And they will learn more from the Q&A we're about to do right now. So diving straight into it, my first question for you is, how closely do you think is business or marketing strategy aligned to the comms content strategy?
First, thanks for having me for the keynote and for the Q&A. I think it's hugely important. I think great content really starts with a content strategy that's grounded in the business. I think as communicators, it's essential that we understand what our internal business clients are trying to achieve and how do we create all of our activities, not just our content, but all of our activities to support that. And then content has to be a key driver of that. And it's, I talked about hybrid cloud as a priority for IBM, and we're really focusing our communications on that this year. And even as we get, step away from the hybrid cloud a little bit further, we're looking at, just set up a function that has 5 campaigns that align to the business objectives that are about telling great stories, having great activations, but most importantly, having great content that is tied directly back to the business objectives that the CEO wants, that our business partners want, that our clients internally and externally need.
Absolutely. And I think I couldn't agree more, because I think we do that even, at Spotify, and I'm sure most of our communications leads across the world do that as well. But when we're talking about this content strategy, do you think it needs to be in line with, again, the entire business strategy and marketing strategy, or do you think we have a little bit of space to wiggle around or distinguish our messaging specifically from a PR perspective for the audiences we are catering to?
I think that there's a fundamental principle that you need to stick to, whether that's internal or external. And I think I'll use a couple different examples for you. I know there are a few people who are watching today who I've worked with in the past. And I think they would all say, and my team who's in India today would say, what I try and do is say, there's a core principle that's set at the highest level from a corporate perspective, but then the message needs to be tweaked, the content needs to be tweaked to make sure it's relevant for the audience it's hitting and you're targeting. And that's going to change by specific, the type of job or the type of individual you're trying to get to, but that's also going to change depending on the market you're in. My personal view is, if I'm trying, it's easy for me to sit here in Armonk, New York and say, this is what we're going to say, and this is what we must do, and there's no two ways about it. Well, Tahina and the team at IBM in India, they're the ones who would, in a normal time, see reporters at a restaurant or, at the grocery store or wherever it might be, and they're the ones who have to understand, who are going to understand much better than I am how messages, how content's going to resonate. So there's always got to be that ability to tweak it. Now, I think the other example I'd use is when we're talking about internal communications. Before we got on, we were talking about the COVID restrictions and how those restrictions are impacting returning to work. What we've done at IBM is we've said there's a set of principles that will be followed everywhere in the world for how we return to work. But the decision of when people return to work will be driven at a local and decided at a local level, as long as they follow those larger principles. So I think that's another example of you get the basic, you get the foundation, but then you have to adjust accordingly.
Sure. And I think I'm just going to go back to the part about messaging again, because I think that's extremely critical for all of us as a community. It's becoming harder and harder to deliver a company's message, especially because there is just so much news right now. The way the media looks today is very different from what it did, say, 6 months ago. And there is a certain amount of pressure to do paid content and advertorials if brands really want to put their message out. What's your take in general on advertorials and paid articles?
I am not a fan of advertorials. I will be very candid about that. I'm just not a fan. But I think the right content can really lead you to where you need to be. Now, let me be very clear. When you put content out socially, there's no such thing as just organic content on social anymore, right? It has some sort of paid that goes behind it to amplify it. But I don't see that as the same way as taking out a full page ad in the New York Times or pick whatever publication is around the world. So I think there's a difference, and I think there's a space for that paid support behind content that you create. But advertorials in the traditional sense, I'm not a big fan of.
And I think one of my learnings as a professional has been that if we're able to talk more about the industry versus only the brand, there is greater acceptance. So then you don't really need to go down the route of paying for content, right? As you said, I don't really think that holds much credibility either. And audiences today are smart enough to understand what content is paid for and what is actually editorial. So when we talk about content strategy, right? So for you, does it make sense to focus it solely on the brand, or do you think today it's more important to talk about where your brand fits in the industry or for the audience, so much wider?
I think you've got to do both, really, to be honest with you. I mean, for us at IBM, we're going to talk about the industry, and we're going to talk about the broader tech industry, but then we're going to talk about the other industries that we work in specifically, whether it's financial services or insurance or healthcare or government or those sorts of things. We're going to do that. But at the same point, you've got to have a bit of brand building that comes with it, and a bit of talking about the reputation of the brand, and establishing that reputation of your brand along the way. But I think it's got to be a harmony. It's not going to be a balance. It's sort of like work-life. There's no work-life balance. There's no, in my mind, there's no brand industry balance. There's got to be a harmony, because there are going to be certain times that you've got to go higher on the industry and lower on the brand, or vice versa. So but I do truly believe it's got to be both.
All right. And often this messaging that we put out would be, in our meetings with journalists or at events through press releases. And today, most of that is either not possible or it's overused. And again, I think the media is sort of reaching that level of fatigue, or they already have, where they're like, please just don't send us any more releases. So what do you think are the newer ways, newer formats that communications professionals can really turn to deliver their messaging with the media?
I think for us, we spend a lot of time looking at where we think the story can make a difference and where we can break through. We really spend a lot of time looking at social platforms and sharing on social platforms, but it's also understanding, who are the reporters and who are the influencers who are going to pick up that content. So I think that's key. It's what's the bank shot to get to them. We've got to go to where our audience is, where they live, and really understand what makes them tick, what makes them get more engaged and more excited about things, whether that's a blog or a forum online, looking at academics and industry publications and outlets and influencers more specifically than we have maybe in the past. And I really think the other piece of this is the medium. We've got to look at the format and understand who you're trying to target as you get there. And as you look at the format, that's going to change. I talked about the comic book approach for our ethical hackers that we took in my keynote. Arguably, it's pretty unusual to do that, but getting there and making it interesting and engaging it gets people's attention. We did a bunch of work in Latin America with our blockchain technology around food. And the team in Latin America, I loved what they did. They came up with a great idea, and they did these virtual cooking classes with chefs, renowned chefs from across Latin America. And we provided ingredients to the people who were going to join the cooking classes. And they were all ingredients that had been pulled through the blockchain. And then they all got online and they did this cooking class, and they learned from the chef how to cook, but they also learned about the blockchain. They learned about the benefits of it. They learned about the vegetables and the food they were preparing. It was a different way to get there. And we actually had reporters coming to us saying, hey, I hear you've got another one of these coming up. I heard it was so great. Can I please join? That happened on a regular occurrence. I mean, you just got to be much more creative right now, I think.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Whenever you do that in India, I'm sure there are enough people in the audience who'd love to be a part of it, even though they're not journalists.
I want to join one. I never got the invite, so.
Given all of this experience you have, what are the 3 things you would recommend or advise to, say, the communications community in terms of their content strategy? What should they really keep in mind when they devise their content strategy?
Like I said before, great content starts with a strategy that's grounded in a deep understanding of the business, and don't deviate from that. That content strategy is going to have to fire on all fronts: the message, the medium, the audience, the platform, your ecosystem, and really being creative. And don't forget, the content's really going to show who you are, not just what you do. And it really will positively impact your reputation and your efforts. So I had the honor to spend some time with Brian Mulroney, the former Prime Minister of Canada, the other day. And he said, when you figure out what you're going to do, understand the pros and the cons of where you're going, and make sure you know how you're going to address both of them and who's going to tell it, who's going to tell that story, so you don't destroy it before you get out the gate. If you do that, you can be successful. I think that's a great summary of how I would approach content in the way moving forward.
Awesome. And I think we'll end with more of a personal question, but which is the one campaign that's really stood out to you? And it could be political, it could be a brand campaign, or even a person, right? An individual sort of PR brand campaign that's really stood out to you in terms of messaging and strategy. Oh,
there have been so many. it's so challenging to say one. I mean, I think over time, I think Nike and their Just Do It campaign has been really fantastic. I think that, let me think a little bit more here. I've got to pick ones that aren't too controversial too. I think that Microsoft has done some great work. I'm proud of the work we've done here at IBM. My former employer, Nissan, has done some amazing work recently around some new products that they've been introducing. There are just so many across the business. I think if I look at communications around the world, I think that everybody has really risen to the occasion as we've gone through this right now, and it's hard to pick just one.
All right. It seems like we also have a question from our audience. So I'm just going to read this out to you. What are your views on how presidential campaigns use content smartly in their campaigns?
I've been fortunate to work on a couple U.S. presidential campaigns over time, and content's king. I mean, this is all about the message and telling the message and moving the voters to where you want them to be. And I think if I summarized it to one thing that I learned the best about content on presidential campaigns and how to best use them, it was when I was working for John Kerry when he ran for president in 2004. Then Senator, now Secretary Kerry said, you know, Jonathan, when I'm sick and tired of telling my story and delivering my message, the voters are finally starting to listen. And that just shows that continued cadence and continued alignment on a message that you have to have. And I think you have to have that in politics, otherwise you will lose right away. And I think that, to me, is something that is essential to bring to business and how we can all use message and content to drive home what we're trying to do. It's the consistency. It's the repetition. And you tell them once, then you tell them again, and then you tell them again after that, and then you keep telling them. And you've got to do that.
True. And I think we just have a couple of minutes to go. So before we end this session, any final thoughts? I know most of it has already been covered in the keynote and our Q&A, but any final thoughts for our audience before we leave?
You know, I would just say to everybody, a lot of the stuff that I've just talked about, I think that the focus on content, the focus on communications overall really has to be both internally and externally. It has to be grounded in the business, has to be grounded on where you're trying to go as a success, what your marker is. I talked about a lot of the campaigns that I'm bringing in, this campaign approach that I'm bringing into IBM. And it's about election day, right? The way I'm looking at it is about election day. The goalpost might move and your election day might change every time. It's not like a traditional political campaign. But you've got to stay focused on what are you trying to do and where you're trying to get to, and not deviate from that. And then I think the other thing I'd say, and this is what I've said to my teams a lot, is, and I learned this from a few people through my career, is it's not going to be perfect every time, and that's okay. You want it to be perfect, but you can't let perfection get in the way of you doing things and making progress and achieving the goals you need to. If it's not perfect, you learn from it, figure out where the problem was, you adjust, and you move forward. If you're going to fail, fail fast. But it's not the end of the world if those things happen. So I think those are the big things that I would say.
Awesome. That's some great advice. I think we're just in time. So thank you so much for being with us today. This was really good, even for me. I've learned a lot from what you've said today. Have a great day, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.